Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be breaking down my top 36 running back rankings and tiers for week number 2 of the 2024 fantasy football season. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 2 running back rankings and tiers for the 2024 fantasy football season. We begin with my running backs 1 through 7 in the S tier. All of these running backs are must start on the week. You don't even have to think twice about it. Breece Hall at number 1 going up against the Tennessee Titans. Now, I understand that he didn't have the best of games last week up against the 49ers, as the 49ers gave the Jets a swirly special, and they didn't really have much answers to that. Aaron Rodgers didn't play all that great. The 49ers defense stood tall, but Breece Hall still had a decent game, and I expect yet another solid game out of Breece Hall, and I expect him to play even better, have a bounce back game. There's a reason why he drafted him so highly in fantasy football drafts just a couple of weeks ago. So Breece Hall belongs at the top. At number 2, we got Saquon Barkley going up against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Saquon Barkley scored 3 touchdowns in Brazil up against the Green Bay Packers, and I see no reason as to why he couldn't have a similar performance this week. I think he comes a bit down to earth because I don't expect him to score 3 touchdowns this time, but it is definitely a possibility. At number 3, we got Bijan Robinson going up against the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia. Bijan Robinson was a victim of the offense in that game. They really could not get it going at all. They were in dire need of a Viagra, and sadly, there were none in stock in hot Atlanta because Bijan Robinson and the Atlanta Falcons really couldn't get it going offensively. Though Bijan Robinson was fed the rock as the clear workhorse running back on the team, I get the matchup up against the Eagles definitely isn't the most ideal, but another guy that you drafted super highly, you are going to play him because even in tougher matchups, Bijan Robinson can make magic with it. At number 4, we got Jonathan Taylor going up against the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay. Not the best game last week, but obviously that was a more high-scoring game. I think this matchup could be a lot more low-scoring, knowing that Jordan Love Me Tender, Love Me Sweet won't be in for the Packers, and they're going to have to just have a completely different game plan with Malik Willis. Last week, the Colts and the Texans got into a firefight. This week, I think, will be a lot lower scoring, and I think Jonathan Taylor is still one of the best running backs in the NFL. Not going to overthink one down game. At number 5, we got Kyren Williams going up against the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona. Now, Kyren Williams had a all right going in week number 1. I wouldn't go ahead and say he had the craziest game on earth, but he was the running back 21. He had 18 carries, 3 targets. So with that amount of volume, that I project that he gets a similar amount this week up against the Arizona Cardinals defense in Arizona that couldn't stop a fucking nosebleed. Kyren Williams should take them to Pound Town. Next up, we move to Christian McCaffrey / Jordan. The numbers, Mason, what do they mean? Now, I expect Christian McCaffrey to miss. I do not expect Christian McCaffrey to play, so Jordan Mason would slot in here as the running back number 6. Now, Jordan Mason absolutely dominated 50 Shades of Grey style last week up against the Jets defense. He had 147 rushing yards, 5 receiving yards, so over 150 yards, and a touchdown. Should have had 2, but it got called back because of Deebo Samuel. He was the running back 5 on the week, and while the Vikings defense stood tall up against the Giants, this is a completely different offense that they have to face this week, and I expect them to be in trouble in this game, and I think Jordan Mason goes crazy again. To close out the S tier, we have my running back number 7, Isaiah Pacheco. Now, Pacheco was not the best, a little sluggish up against the Baltimore Ravens. 16 fantasy points. He did end up scoring a touchdown. This week, going up against the Bengals, though, a much better matchup. I think the Chiefs are going to be able to gel a little bit better in this game, and they already scored a bunch of points last week. They should be able to do that yet again. Not panicking on Pacheco after one down game. Again, a thing that happens in week 1 is great players play bad, bad players play great. And I'm just going to stick with my priors. Just because Isaiah Pacheco had a down week 1 doesn't mean you should jump ship and try to trade him or try and sit him or something crazy like that. Next up, we move into the A tier with my running backs number 8 through 13. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs last week went up against the LA Rams in prime time, finishing as the running back 15. He is coming off of an injury, and I do expect them to continue to ramp up his workload. This week might be the week where they fully unleash Jahmyr Gibbs, another guy that you drafted super highly, so you're going to start him. All the guys in the S tier must starts. All the guys in the A tier are must starts as well, unless somehow you have 3 of these guys, but even then, you would just play the third guy as your flex. Next up, we got Alvin Kamara going up against the Dallas Cowboys in Jerry's World. Now, last week, Alvin Kamara had a cupcake matchup up against the Carolina Panthers, and he absolutely dicked them down in that game, gave them the Bukake special as the New Orleans Saints in unison Eiffel Towered the Carolina Panthers, aside from Chris Olave, who had like 3 fucking points. But Alvin Kamara scored 22 points. Alvin Kamara was heavily involved in the offense, which is exactly what I suspected all offseason long. I get that his efficiency numbers have dipped compared to prior seasons, but he averaged 5.5 yards per carry last week. Definitely a much rougher matchup, though. Going from the Panthers to the Dallas Cowboys is like going up against a bunch of copies of Tyrion Lannister, and now you have to go and battle up against a bunch of copies of the Mountain. But when push comes to shove, due to the amount of receiving upside Kamara has, I think he belongs inside of the A tier. Next up, we got Derrick Henry. Now, week number 1 was no bueno for Mr. Derrick Henry, Mr. Tractorcito. Only 11 fantasy points, and he looked slow. It looked like they attached a bunch of weights to each of his feet, and he just couldn't get it moving. Only 3.5 yards per carry. But this week, he gets a way better matchup up against the Las Vegas Raiders at home in Baltimore. Justice Hill is very clearly going to be involved. Harbaugh said it, but still, Derrick Henry is going to be the goal line back. He should be getting a couple targets every single game, and I think this is a big bounce back spot for Mr. Henry. Next up, we got J.K. Dobbins. Now, expert consensus rankings on Fantasy Pros has J.K. Dobbins as the running back 19, but personally, I just want to rank him a lot higher. The motherfucker had 10 carries for 135 yards last week, and he also had 3 catches and a touchdown as the running back number 4. Now he gets the exact same matchup that Alvin Kamara absolutely eviscerated last week. So J.K. Dobbins has a great matchup here. He already dominated up against the Raiders, who I believe Derrick Henry is going to have a big game against. So this is a perfect scenario for Dobbins. We always knew deep down J.K. Dobbins was amazing. The only thing holding him back was the injuries. Next up, we got Rachaad with 2 A's White going up against the Detroit Lions in Detroit. Last week, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers trounced the Commanders. Rachaad White was the running back 16. This is a guy that's going to be as inefficient as possible. It's truly amazing to watch. He gets 2.1 yards per carry, but it doesn't matter because he gets 6 targets, 6 receptions, and 75 yards. We know he's good for a couple of dump-offs every single game from Baker Mayfield, Baker touchdown maker. If Rachaad White would have found pay dirt, found the end zone last week, he probably could have been a top 5 running back up against the Lions in a high-scoring game. I expect a heavy dosage of Rachaad White. Now, they do have another running back behind Rachaad White in Bucky Irving, who will at times come into the game, but ultimately this is still Rachaad White's backfield. Closing out the A tier, we got my guy Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans. A touchdown last week, over 160 all-purpose yards, running back number 2. Now, all summer, I was given the Gawk 9000 special to Joe Mixon, talking him up, and everyone didn't want to hop on the bandwagon with me. They said, Nick, he's not as efficient as he used to be, but I said, don't worry about the efficiency. Don't worry about the fact that the guy's an unk now, being in the NFL for so long. Shout out Shannon Sharp. But ultimately, Joe Mixon is now in an even better situation. So even if he's not ripping off these huge runs that we remember in the past with Joe Mixon early in the Cincinnati days, as long as he is just what he was last year, which was a top 12 running back in fantasy football, he could easily repeat that in Houston, and things are looking great for him. Solid matchup as well up against the Bears. Next up, we move into the B tier with my running backs 14, 15, 16, and 17. At number 14, we got James Cook of the Buffalo Bills going up against the Miami Dolphins in Miami. Now, I mentioned in the start-sit video that it really felt like deja vu for James Cook. It was the same shit, different day. Towards the end of last season, we saw James Cook get a boatload of touches. His touches increased greatly once they ended up firing their offensive coordinator. Now they have the same offensive coordinator from the end of last season where James Cook was getting a bunch of touches. The problemo here was that he could not score a touchdown. Last week, we see Josh Allen running them in, and James Cook is left like a cuck watching it happen on the sideline. Now, I'm sure James Cook is perfectly fine with it as long as the Bills win, but as a fantasy football owner of James Cook, it is incredibly frustrating. He is going to get a bunch of yards up against this Dolphins run defense that could not stop me. I can guarantee you I could put the pads on and run a train on that defense, but if he doesn't score a touchdown, you're kind of just fucked, and you're going to end up with like the running back 18 to 24. So I can't rank him too highly because he's just iced out of the end zone, Frozone style. But if he does find pay dirt here, he does knock on the door and jump on in there, then James Cook could be a top 10 running back. Next up, we got Kenneth Walker III of the Seattle Seahawks. Now he's been dealing with an oblique injury and missed practice on Wednesday. Now the practice report is going to be very crucial today, tomorrow, and going into Sunday to kind of know how we should feel. If he plays, you're starting him without a second thought. He is the clear lead bell cow back on this team. Zach Charbonnet is just holding the Gatorade on the sideline, and Kenneth Walker is balling out of control. I expect Walker to have a solid performance here. Now, the matchup is far from ideal as the Patriots defense had the Cincinnati Bengals offense behind bars and they threw away the key. But ultimately, I do think that was more of the Bengals offense just not being ready at all compared to the Patriots having like the best defense ever, right? So again, not the best matchup. Even if the Patriots defense isn't that great, they still have a solid defense. They're not the best for Walker. He's banged up. Could be a re-injury. But if he plays, all these guys in the B tier, you're also starting as well. Again, it's just kind of a drop down, in my opinion, in my confidence level. Next up, we move to Travis Etienne going up against the Cleveland Browns. Now, last week, had Javon Holland not played Mike Tyson's punch-out and knocked the ball out of Etienne's hands, the motherfucker would have scored 2 touchdowns. Instead, he just gets 1, a fumble, and the running back 28 performance. Now, the usage of Tank Bigsby, Ned Bigsby's brother from Ned's Declassified, was quite scary, right? Seeing Tank Bigsby in there so much was a little bit worrying, but ultimately Etienne is still the guy, and while the matchup isn't the best on paper, I still think Etienne should have a halfway decent game, and again, it's not like you're sitting Etienne based on where you drafted him. Next up, we got James Conner. Now, I made this joke in the running back start-sit video, and I'm going to reuse it. I'm going to steal my own joke, Amy Schumer style, and I'm going to tell you, death taxes James Conner top 12 running back when he's healthy. I, all offseason, tried to talk myself into Trey Benson potentially stealing more of the workload here, but instead, that doesn't really happen, and James Conner is the same guy that he's always been, which is one of the best running backs in the National Football League when he stays healthy. Now, James Conner is the type of guy that wakes up in the morning, goes to brush his teeth, accidentally somehow deep throats his fucking toothbrush, hits the uvula or whatever you call that thing, the punching bag that's in your mouth, pause, and then he's out for the season, right? We don't root for injuries here, but obviously it was not the best for James Conner when he gets hurt. But when he is healthy, he is one of the best running backs in the NFL. The matchup here up against the Rams is a little bit terrifying, but when push comes to shove, you should still have him ranked relatively highly, and it feels very fair to me to have him ranked as the running back 17. Next up, we move on into the C tier, and this is getting close to the tier where if you have to play them, it feels very, very scary. Now, if you have to play Ramondre Stevenson, Devon Achane, Jacobs, Brian Robinson, Najee Harris, my running backs 18 through 22, it's not like the sky is falling down like you're in Chicken Little or it's raining meatballs like that one movie that's animated. Maybe something about meatballs, I don't remember. But ultimately, it's okay, right? But I don't like these guys as much as the other guys that are ranked ahead of him. But once we get past the D tier, right? There feels like a pretty staunch drop-off, in my opinion, from the C to the D tier. But once you get into the E tier, The F tier, you are basically just sending a prayer to the fantasy football gods above that things go your way, because things could certainly go tits up with the guys lower down. So Ramondre Stevenson goes hog wild up against the Cincinnati Bengals. Perfect game script for Ramondre Stevenson, going up against a offense that is limp dick, can't get anything going, and then the Patriots are able to just run the ball, rely on Jacoby Brissett not making any crazy stupid plays, and churn the rock, drip the clock down. Up against the Seattle Seahawks, the question is, can they do that again up against Geno Smith? Will Geno Smith be able to get a lead in this game, or will the Patriots be able to coast so that they can continue to run the ball and don't get forced into having Jacoby throw the ball a bunch? I think this game will be close, so I think the game script should be more favorable towards Ramondre Stevenson. But I could also see this game going the opposite way, and the Seattle Seahawks just having such a solid offense. And while we have a lot of question marks about Geno Smith, he goes out there and kicks the Patriots defense in the teeth, and then Ramondre is kind of just in pass catching scenarios. They have Gibson as well, so it just wouldn't be as ideal. So with a less ideal matchup up against a strong Seahawks defense, that's why I don't have him ranked higher. At number 19, we got Devon Achane. Now, Devon Achane's usage in week 1 was incredible. It was exactly what me and a lot of the people that said, take the risk, don't be silly, take the risk. You know, sometimes you want to be as safe as possible, wrap that condom over your team, but the Dolphins offense is so powerful that I was willing to take the risk on Devon Achane, and it paid dividends week 1. Running back 3 in fantasy football, 7 catches for 76 yards, and he scored a touchdown. Now he's questionable going into tonight's game. Now, if you look at the last couple of games where Achane is kind of questionable going into the game, he's a game time decision, going to work out in pregame. This week, optimism is that he plays, so I think he plays. But normally, in those games, he doesn't play the best, right? So while I think the upside is ultimately there, while I think the matchup is there for the taking of Devon Achane, if he was fully healthy, he would be chilling in the S or the A tier. But due to the injury risk that, hey, maybe Devon Achane isn't the poster boy of health, right? And Devon Achane hasn't played the best coming off of injuries, makes me a lot more pessimistic. Again, the upside is certainly there, but I just wouldn't say you have to start Devon Achane this week. Next up, we got Josh Jacobs. Now, Josh Jacobs also on the injury report. He has a back injury, was limited in practice yesterday, continue to follow the practice report, but I believe that he plays. Now, this matchup up against the Colts that just saw Joe Mixon absolutely devour that defense like the meals you can get at the store. If you've never had a Devour meal, those things slap if you're a degenerate like me who doesn't feel like cooking all the time, but no free ads for them. But Josh Jacobs has the matchup here. That's amazing. It's great. Shout out Tony the Tiger. Problem? Big problem. Jordan Love ain't playing. It's Malik Willis. So the game script's going to be negative here. The Colts should be up, dancing in the end zone, and they're going to be chasing, trying to throw the ball late in games, which won't work well because Malik Willis sucks donkey cock. So Josh Jacobs in a negative game script. Now, early on, they're going to rely heavily on him. Heavily. Take the ball out of Malik's hand, dump the ball off to Jacobs, run the ball a million times, but eventually that's not going to work because the game's going to get out of hand. Presumably, the game gets out of hand, so Jacobs has to fall down. Once Jordan Love comes back, we get to bump him back up, or maybe Malik Willis looks like Patrick Mahomes, and then we move him up anyways. Next up, we got Brian Robinson Jr. going up against the Giants. Brian Robinson had a great game last week as the running back 14. Now, I was pretty questionable entering into the year. What's Eckler's workload going to look like? What's Robinson's workload going to look like? How are things going to go when they're down, or would you see way more Eckler, more Robinson? Eckler played, Robinson played. Seems like Robinson's the guy. Now, again, we talked about this all week. Week 1 is a liar. In week number 1 isn't necessarily what's going to happen in week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5. So take week 1 with a grain of salt, right? This might not very clearly be Brian Robinson's backfield come this week or come a couple of weeks from now. So take it with a grain of salt. But again, when you're playing up against the Giants, a defense that has more holes than a fucking piece of Swiss cheese, right? Brian Robinson Jr., even with the question marks of usage, should be able to take full advantage of this matchup, just as we saw Aaron Jones do last week. At number 22, we got Najee Harris going up against the Broncos in Denver. I think they're going to ramp up Jaylen Warren's workload, which ticks down Najee Harris's workload. They also used Cordero Patterson last week, so this might end up being a shit show. But it's all about the matchup here, right? In Miami, it's all about the U. Here, it is all about the matchup. You are going up against a defense in the Denver Broncos that is bottom of the barrel against the run. We just saw last week that Kenneth Walker was very viable up against this Denver Broncos defense. Now, in my opinion, Kenneth Walker is significantly better than Najee Harris. So I'm not going to pretend that it's apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. But the team relied on Najee last week, and if they rely on him again, while he was only the running back 35 last week, if he scores here, he should have a much better showing. Again, his ranking is 100% due to the matchup and has very little to do with the player that Najee Harris is. Next up, we move into the D tier. Now, this is where we start to feel a drop-off, and then after this is where you have fallen off Niagara Falls, where you are sleeping with the fishes like Big Pussy in The Sopranos. So Aaron Jones of the cold like Minnesota Vikings was the running back 9 last week, right? Wet dream matchup up against the Giants. He gets into the batter's box. He calls his shot like Babe Ruth, and he hits a home run out of the park. It hits that big Coke sign that's in the San Francisco Giants Stadium like his name was Barry Bonds, right? But now we go from the Giants, one of the weakest defenses in the NFL, to the 49ers, one of the best, if not the best, the undisputed number 1 defense in the NFL. And with Sam Darnold, sure, it's a revenge game, but I'm scared. Now, Jones should get enough touches to be fine, but this is definitely a big letdown spot for him. Next up, we got David Montgomery, running back 17 last week. We should expect Montgomery to finish anywhere from running back 18 to 26, 28 every single week, or maybe 16 to 28. And then if something was to happen to Gibbs, he's going to be like a top 5 running back. And if he somehow scores twice instead of just once, he'll be a top 12 running back. So David Montgomery feels incredibly safe every single week, but the upside is heavily capped by Gibbs, who I believe will see more touches this week. Montgomery is a very, very safe play, but again, the upside is limited. Next up, we got Tony Pollard. Now, Tony Pollard looked last week like the Tony Pollard that we thought we drafted last year, right? If you paid that pretty penny to draft Tony Pollard, who ended up bending us over a table without the use of lube, that guy that you drafted last year was a shell of what we just saw, right? We thought we were getting that explosive Tony Pollard, the Tony Pollard that's fucking dancing in the end zone, right? Instead, we got discount Tony Pollard, Walmart Tony Pollard last year, but in week 1, he rose above and had a great game. Now, Tony Pollard looked a lot better towards the end of the last season for the Cowboys, but a lot of people that had Tony Pollard were not in the playoffs, so they probably don't even remember that being the case. So Tony Pollard now has a tough test on the Jets. I get the Jets just got spit roasted by Jordan Mason. The numbers, Mason, what do they mean? But I expect them to look better this week. Ultimately, though, Pollard was the running back 12 last week up against the Bears, so I don't want to discount his play. So running back 25 feels fair because I think the Jets defense will be a lot more heavily fortified this week. At number 26, we got Zach Moss, running back of the Cincinnati Bengals, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. He luck boxed his way. He spun the mystery box, and he got a fucking thunder gun. He scored a touchdown, which saved his day. The Bengals defense comes out uninspired. If they look disinterested again, right, if they're getting pounded by the Chiefs, that's not good for Zach Moss. But I expect them to at least look better. That's why Zach Moss gets ranked here. But again, he is definitely a lot more risky than Montgomery, Pollard, or Aaron Jones. You can almost dip him and the next guy down to the next tier, Jerome Ford F150. Now, Jerome Ford saw so many targets last week that I can't truly bury him because he had 7 targets. But if Deshaun Watson played how Deshaun Watson played last week, then Jerome Ford's upside that I thought was incredibly high might have taken a humongous hit. Now, maybe Watson will shake it off, but I don't think he will. The Jaguars defense looks stout against the run, but that might just be because the Miami Dolphins offensive line sucks more cock than Lana Rhodes. So Jerome Ford entering into this game, I'm not going to be too high on him, but if he continues to get the targets, he's going to be fine. But he's another guy that really lucked into scoring a touchdown, especially since his touchdown was basically a buzzer beater at the end of that Browns game. Next up, we move to a matchup between the Dallas Cowboys and the Saints to begin the E tier with Ezekiel Elliott. Before we talk about Zeke, though, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends, our sponsor over at Underdog Fantasy. If you're new to Underdog Fantasy and click on the link in the video description or use promo code Notorious, you guys will receive a free pick like Josh Allen higher than half of a total yard, plus a free deposit bonus offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. You match that 0.5 total yards with another pick from the Dolphins or one of the games on Sunday or the game on Monday. And if that hits, you'll get 3 times what you enter into your pick'em slip. If you're watching this on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're like, oh, the Josh Allen game already happened on Thursday Night Football. Hopefully the Dolphins won. But, you know, that game already happened. The Dolphins lost. The Bills lost. Whatever happened. What happens now? You will get a different free pick like the Josh Allen one, but just a different player than Josh Allen. So make sure you guys check that out. Link in the video description. It helps me out a ton. So Zeke ended up having a fine game. He had a fine game up against the Cleveland Browns last week. Now, the reason why it was a good game, a fine game, was because he scored a touchdown. Now, he averaged 4 yards per carry, which is good for Zeke. But the touchdown is what took him over the top. They also used Rico Dowdle relatively heavily. Now going up against the Saints team that just stonewalled the Panthers, it's got me a little bit panicked. If Zeke's just going to be able to bully his way into the end zone every single week, then you're going to be fine with Zeke. But if he doesn't score, you are going to be very, 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 very disappointed. DeAndre Swift's up next. Now, I don't want to start DeAndre Swift at all, but I have to rank him highly. Not really highly, but I have to rank him here because he dominated the backfield in terms of snaps. I thought this was going to be a 2 or 3-headed dragon where DeAndre Swift might get buried. But no, Swift played 70% of the snaps, about that amount. But he scored 5 fantasy points. If the Bears offense is terrible, downright a disgrace to the NFL, then it's not going to be good here. But if they do bounce back slightly, Swift should be okay. But again, none of these guys do I really want to start. Next up, we got Javonte Williams, who got absolutely rinsed by his teammate, Jaleel McLaughlin. Now, he did play more snaps, but Jaleel McLaughlin did everything else better. Now, that game script wasn't the best, but it's not like going up against the Steelers, where Bijan Robinson got a little bit locked up like Tyreek Hill last week. That ain't the best, right? So the Steelers defense, TJ Watt, no bueno for Mr. Bo Nix, but Javonte's still the lead back, so I'm going to rank him here. Devin Singletary, on paper, this is a matchup that you should be driving around like Paul Revere screaming about, right? Talking about the British are coming, talking about how you're going up against the Commanders. This is amazing. Call the family up. It's red panty night, Conor McGregor style. But instead, he's on the Giants. He's on a team that cannot move the football. He is on a team with a quarterback who needs LASIK eye surgery like Jameis Winston. He is on a team that might not even score a fucking point offensively. It doesn't matter how bad the Commanders' defense is. Daniel Jones, Brian Daboll, and the Giants ship has sunk. It's been 1 week and they're already eliminated from the playoffs. I don't think they have a chance. I don't think they even stand a chance. They might as well just wave the fucking white flag and say we're done. Because it's that bad. Okay? Now the Commanders matchup is great. It's awesome. This is a great matchup. So maybe Singletary can do a lot with the touches he gets because the Commanders defense can't stop a nosebleed. But he's on the Giants. So we can't rank him higher. On any other team, he'd be ranked so much higher. Next up, we move on into the final tier of backs for this week. Tyjae Spears is the headliner here, running back 32. Now, while it was Tony Pollard, the team already mentioned they want to give more touches to Tyjae Spears. So while he took a back seat last week, he could be in the driver's seat this week. Don't think that'll be the case, though. Rougher matchup leads to him being ranked here, but if his touches go up, we could see him moving on up the rankings. Eckler coming in here feels like a fair ranking. He was the running back 32 last week, so we put him at that exact same spot. Now, his involvement wasn't very high, but he did get 4 targets, 4 receptions, 52 receiving yards. He could, get 4, 5, 6 dump-offs again and take one of those to the crib because the Giants' defense is so bad. But if he's only getting, let's say he gets 5 carries a game, he got 2 last week, you're just not going to feel confident in the guy. Next up, we got Zamir White and Alexander Mattison. Now, Zamir White fumbles last week. Fumble! And then all she wrote, because then it was Alexander Madison's season. Now, Alexander Mattison had a big receiving touchdown straight to the cribbo. Running back 18. Gun to the head. If I have to play one, I think Zamir White's going to start off as the lead back, and unless he fumbles things away again, I think Zamir White has a much better performance. I think Zamir White is levels ahead of Alexander Mattison. And I believe that the coach will let him cook as the lead back. But these are just beliefs, okay? I don't know for sure. So if White is kind of on the back seat, we might regret this. Have a tough matchup against the Ravens anyways. So unless one of these guys breaks one loose, I don't really see either of them having a huge game. Final guy here, Jaleel McLaughlin. It just makes sense to let him top off the top 38 here. The top 36, I apologize. I don't know how to read. The top 36. Now again, outsnapped heavily by Javonte, but Jaleel outplayed him. Now, Jaleel didn't score 25 fantasy points or something. He scored 6. He was the running back 42. So nothing to write home about. But it was at least promising, like, hey, if you have McLaughlin, he got 5 targets, 10 rushes. But he's going up against the Steelers. So again, the guys in the E tier, the guys in the F tier, you don't want to have to be starting them. So if you're down bad at running back, sure, follow the rankings. But these are guys I don't even want in my flex, okay? While I think Zeke could score a touchdown, while I think Javonte could bounce back, Singletary's got the great matchup. You don't want these guys in your lineup. So if you have other options, play them ahead of them. If you have other flex options, they are way better than these fucking scrubs as of right now. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did enjoy, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below while you're down there. Whether you are new to the channel or not, make sure you guys leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. Check out one of the videos on your screen if you haven't seen them already. Check out Underdog Fantasy promo code Notorious to get that free pick. Josh Allen higher than a total yard, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great rest of your guys' day. And as always, good boy.